started with a 157, and when I was about to test, I was averaging about 163, and I had a couple odd high-end scores of like 167 and even 169 at one point, but they were outliers. So when I finally took the test, I was pleasantly surprised and got back a 168. So it was at the higher end of where I thought I was going to be for a net, I think, 11-point improvement over my initial diagnostic. I came across one of your videos, and one of the things that I really liked about what you said was where you study from matters. The more I started studying and looking for external supplementary resources, particularly for logic games, I found out that it does matter. Kaplan, for example, I wasn't really liking a lot of their resources because it didn't make sense and it seemed very different. And as I went into it, there were reasons why. But continuing on my journey, I got more involved in, I think, your lessons for logic games, because that was mostly where I was going to improve. And I really liked your philosophies, and it seemed to really line up more than just beyond studying for a test. Certain strategies like addressing your weakness. It doesn't make sense if you're like -2 on logic games, but you're -5 on reading comprehension, to focus on getting perfect logic games. Those kind of philosophies resonated with me. So that was essentially what my journey was. And I did find out you can study for too long. I thought I was a power horse because I usually am with most other things, but it does get tiring after a while. But yeah, so that was generally my journey. And the thing I think was the biggest help for me was once I actually started not just trying to shoot for the lower score, but actually understanding the test and making sure that I understood why I got something wrong. And not just in a cursory sense that, oh yeah, I'm a silly person for missing that. How could I have possibly missed it? And I think the difficulty was in connecting, I missed this question and I'm never going to see it again. That was my initial thinking. So it was hard to find value in it, but the more time I spent with it, the more I understood the underlying logic behind it and saw how it connected to the future. And once I saw that, I started knocking them out. And my study time went down too, because I was missing less. That was the best thing, because I wouldn't spend all day on something. I would just miss like 5 to 8 questions. And I'd be like, oh, good, I only have to spend an hour on this now. I had come as a non-traditional student, so I've got a fair bit of work experience. And one of the key things that I understood with work experience is, especially as a supervisor, if you don't know it well enough to explain it to somebody, you don't know it well enough. And I found that to be true with the LSAT as well. Even with stuff I thought I already knew, I could think about it in different ways. So I really enjoyed hearing other people's struggles and trying to just help them through those struggles. Whether or not I was familiar with it didn't matter, because if I wasn't, I learned something new and learned to see something differently. And even if I was familiar with it, I could kind of reverse engineer it to where I could explain a concept to them. And that also helped me immensely because it was less intuitive. One thing about my LSAT experience that I did want to share, that was two things actually that was unusual. One was with logic games. I was very confident in my logic games ability, and I was very consistently scoring within a -1 or -2 was what I ended up on. And when the test happened, the last game only had, I think, 4 or 5 questions. It was very short, and that made me nervous because I know how those games tend to be. They tend to be very difficult. And fortunately, it was the last one, because I did not like bouncing around because it messed with my internal clock with timing these things. Because that was another big thing, is, and your internal clock helps a lot because you know what feels. I got a feel for what was right amount of time to spend on something, and then I would just get. Fortunately, I didn't have to do that a lot. But I got to the last section for logic games, and it was a game I had never seen before. it had elements that were similar to other games, but I couldn't get past the orientation question, which is the very first question, of course. And I would get the follow-up wrong, and I started to panic because I was like, how the heck am I missing this? This is worth like 20% of the logic game's grade. I'm going to find it. All these different thoughts. So I just stopped. I breathed for a second, allowed myself to just acknowledge the distraction and refocus. And it was killer because I only had about 4 minutes left to do these 5 questions. And I was like, well, I'll go with what it appears to me. I'm not going to try to overcomplicate it. And I finished question 1, didn't feel confident. Question 2, didn't feel confident, but I had to move on. And I got to question 3. And that question made sense and it seemed more simple. And then by the time I got to question 5, I felt, yeah, I got all of this. I completely understand what it's saying. And I knocked each one of them out in like 45 seconds. It was the fastest I've ever done a logic game. And most of the time I just didn't understand it, but I didn't panic and I was able to hammer them out unbelievably fast. I had to guess on the last one though, because I didn't even have time to read the question. But I was very pleased with that because I was freaking out because I'd never seen a question like that. And the second thing briefly was just distractions. There were a lot more than I thought, even at home, because I made sure my fiance knew exactly how important this was and would still walk up and down the hallway and I'd hear boots or whatever clacking. My dog came up to the window, which I had open because I like the outdoors. It's calming for me. And Laredo would come up to the window and check on me. It'd be distracting. But I found that acknowledging those kind of distractions when you're actually in the thick of it is a lot better than trying to ignore them, because if you acknowledge it, just take a second, breathe, and say, yeah, I'm allowing myself to be distracted. 2 seconds later, refocus. It was so much better for my psyche than trying to ignore it. I feel confident because getting into a good law school really takes a lot of the pressure off. And that's what is really comforting to me, and which enables me to relax during my time off for the most part. One thing that I do want to part, because it was the biggest thing that helped me throughout my LSAT ventures, was just knowing what my weaknesses are and what my strengths are as well. Like, I never studied for reading comprehension. I didn't crack open a book. I didn't feel that I need to, because I knew what I was weak in and where the areas of improvement I could be most. And I also knew when it was time for me to take a break. And I didn't push myself in that respect because I had done it before and it wound up hurting my scores. So knowing what your weaknesses and your strengths are, honestly, and addressing those are the biggest things that you can do to help out your score and your mental health as well, which is something you do have to take care of.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.